Before we get started with this episode, we have a major favor to ask you.
If you could subscribe, like, and comment, especially with somebody that you'd love to see on the show, we would really appreciate that, and it would be amazing.
This helps us more than you know. In fact, once we hit 1,000 subscribers, and that is our goal, we are going to choose 2 of you to come to our very first Shoreline Show meetup with our team and our past guest.
And if you want more of the Shoreline Show, you can get on us on all the major audio podcast platforms.
Now, let's get on to the next episode. Welcome, everyone. It is so good to see you all today. We
Absolutely.
are coming to you and have a kind of a little deep topic we want to talk about today.
Yeah, it's kind of one of the first ones that we decided that we're going to start by just diving into our heads a little bit and where we think and what's going on.
Yeah.
So what topic are we talking about today, Shelley?
So we're kind of talking about division versus unity, and what are those two things? How have we experienced division, and how do we experience unity?
Well, I think the goal is the more you separate people, the more power certain people have.
Right.
So you look just in general, there's money in, are you a Michigan State? Are you Democrat? Are you Republican? What are you? There's so many of them we can talk about.
Right.
We break them down to religions. We break it down to political parties. Sports teams.
Yeah.
And the smaller you get the group together, the more there's a culture behind it even a little bit more, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the crazy thing about experiencing division, we've seen it a lot over the past few years, but I remember divisive things happening even when I was young. But I think the crazy thing about it is that people with division, it's just so natural for people to take sides and things and then be so passionate about the side that they're on.
Yeah, they're definitely polarized.
It's
for sure.
Polarizing. Yes.
For sure.
Yeah. And how have we seen that over our lives? I'm a little bit older than you.
Yeah.
How have we seen it in the past few years? How do we see it happening going forward?
Well, I think the ultimate divide, right, is haves and has-nots, right? That's what it really comes down to is people, that, even if you look at sports, there's a winner and there's a loser. If you look at political parties, there's a winner and there's a loser, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's where everybody's trying to sit there and say, okay, what does it mean? But I'm a firm believer if it takes a community and people different to create the world we're in. That's a beautiful part about the United States, and we're not the dictator communists that a lot of countries are, is we actually have freedom to be able to have a mixing pot of all sorts of types, and I think we're losing that a little bit. Mm-hmm. I think right now, I personally believe the United States is recolonizing a little bit, and I think we're gonna still be United States. We're gonna be free, but I think we're gonna see even tighter niche groups. I think that's where we're gonna be going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll go to that in a little bit. One of the things you said was you started out by saying the haves and the have-nots, and just since I've known you, when we seen the downturn in the real estate market, because we're both in real estate,
right? 2008, 2009. That was crazy.
Well, and it kind of started 6 and took a big dive down, and it lasted several years. But what we saw back then, I think, has widened that gap between the haves and the have-nots. We'll just do a home ownership level.
I would agree.
Just on home ownership, how today it is so much more difficult for people to even buy a first-time home, a first-time home buyer.
It's almost impossible for a lot of these first-time home buyers. I think it's going to continue to get harder and harder. You look at most wealth is created in real estate in
Yep.
general. So the people that own real estate and you own land, you own property, you're going to win.
Yeah.
But you look at even institutional buy-in on houses, right? During like 2008, 2009.
Yeah, what
And
happened
then
with
even
that?
today, you have a lot of companies, like huge mega companies that are not companies, but like
Is it BlackRock?
BlackRock, Vanguard. You got these huge companies that are hedge funds essentially
Yeah.
that'll turn around and buy real estate up, and they've doubled in the few years the amount of
Oh
real
my
estate that they're
goodness.
buying.
Well,
So I believe in the future that
Yeah.
people won't own real estate. Huge companies will, and then
I agree, and I feel like that all started during the downturn in the market. And some of it, when I look back on it, I think, did they do that on purpose?
I think it's definitely possible.
I think it's possible.
I mean,
And
you figure every time
yeah.
you transfer over hands or you transfer over anything, you refinance, you restructure your loan, you're 30 more years,
Right.
and most likely lately you're in a higher interest rate.
Right. Yeah. So I've talked to several people about this. We'll get into, they're like, oh, what's happening in the real estate market now? And, and I'll say, well, you can hardly get into, Jennison under a certain price range.
And it's just
Well,
starting where the real estate prices are going to go.
That's just the starting point. And they're like, why is that? And I'm like, okay, from my experience, just from when I started in real estate in 2000, it was a very stable real estate market. You had buyers, you had sellers, you had inventory that was anywhere from 3 to 6 months of inventory, depending on how many houses came on the market, the time of year. And it seems like, and even through my childhood, it seems like that was the story, of the real estate market.
You want to buy a house, you go look, and you find one.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple as that.
And when we showed houses, we went and showed 10 houses, and people picked one.
Right.
And it
So
was,
you had to just be good at identifying what people...
Now you show them one house a week, and then maybe 2 weeks later you show them another house before they can actually find one, and then you're up against people when you're doing it. But the downturn is when everything got turned on its head.
It did, definitely.
And what happened at that point in time is, because all of these homes, because of the whole mortgage crisis, all of these homes flooded the market, and they were bought up by who? They were bought up by
a lot of them were about
institutions.
Institutions,
Investors. They did put some measures in place where they put some first-time home buyer incentives out there, and they did some things where investors couldn't buy properties. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
They couldn't buy them.
Yeah, absolutely. You had to be owner occupied to be able to buy certain foreclosures
for a time period,
which I think are great rules.
And they did that to try to
preserve home ownership.
Home ownership.
I think that's the key. I think that you have to do is try to preserve home ownership for people where it's affordable and the average person can. And right now we're not in that economy.
We're not in that economy. But what happened back then is all these investors, whether your hometown investor went out and bought up 10, 20, 30 homes, or big corporations came in and bought blocks of homes. The problem that we're having now is all of those homes were purchased and they have never come back on the market.
Yeah, typically if institutions buy homes, they won't ever sell them.
No.
They'll sell off their debts, but they're not going to sell off their homes, right? They're just not. They're going to hold them forever. Mm-hmm. So once they buy homes, some areas as high as 10% of all homes are owned by institutional investors.
And I think it's even higher than that in some places. But I think what that has done has affected what we're seeing today, because those first-time home buyer homes are not even available anymore.
And how are you? Most people are gonna compete with an institutional investor coming in and saying, I'm going to pay cash for a piece of property.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to come in and you see it. They'll come in and they'll pay cash, and you can offer a $50,000 higher, and they're able to do that with cash. So it's like, how do you beat that?
Yeah. So what that did, and we're talking about division and unity, is I think it made a wider division between the people that own real estate, that have been able to build wealth, and the people that lost during that time have not been able to recover. And so they're in that cycle of have not.
Absolutely.
And young people that are coming up because of the lack of inventory, and especially affordable housing inventory. A lot of them are going to end up going into that have not.
Yeah, I mean, you can make good money.
Because you can make good money, but you can never save enough to put down, and you're fighting home values going way up and interest rates right now.
I think that's what a lot of people between their ages of 20, 30 are battling.
Yeah.
I mean, inflation's high, gas prices are high, food prices are high, and I think that's what the Fed is trying to solve by raising interest rates, is slowing down inflation, which they can do that for a period of time. It's going to help a little bit.
Right.
You raise interest rates and it's going to dry up money. So as money dries up, then what ultimately happens is you slow down consumer spending.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you slow down consumer spending, then what ends up happening is supply and demand. There's less demand.
Mm-hmm.
So then ultimately it should bring down prices. But that is short-lived.
Right. It's all artificial.
It's all artificial because what ends up happening with that is at some point you either live in this society where things aren't skyrocketing and nobody has money ever, and it's just the ultimate wealthy, the people that have.
Right.
Or you start to drop interest rates where everybody can buy, but then it's a feeding frenzy and we're all working against each other to buy that same house. Instead of right now, as interest rates are rising, you have less people in the market, but as interest rates come down, you have more people in the market. So now we're fighting against each other, trying to buy this one house that 50 people are trying to write that offer on.
Exactly.
So it's tough. It's definitely a battle.
So when we started talking about all these things, we were talking about division versus unity. So let's talk a little bit about unity, because I think that kind of leads into one of the things that you were talking about, where there's going to be communities that rise up from this, and you call them cult-like.
I think we're going to go into a world where, and again, it comes down to how much control we want to give people, but it's going to be, you have the haves, right, that own a lot of stuff. So they're going to own, and you're going to start to see people recolonizing as the United States. This is what I believe is going to happen. I think you can see companies do it. I think you're going to see churches do it. I think you're going to see people as individuals do it. I'm seeing a lot of these coaching programs, they're buying ranches, and that they're doing is saying, hey, you know what, if you think like me, and you're like, let's say you're a high level entrepreneur, you think a certain way, you're a go-getter, you can turn around and come to my ranch, and we all gather together, we're all learning from each other. But it's also going to be where you can bring your costs down because everybody lives together. So I believe we're going to recolonize, and you're going to see the people that really know how to control their type of group of people, and it's essentially a recolonizing, right? It's going to be a cult-like behavior, and you're seeing it more and more because as the world evolves, I mean, we're talking about, we don't really know where a lot of the stuff comes from. Like, for an example is, your shoes or your clothing or anything that you wear. It's like, okay, I mean, I recently at the Economic Club, they were talking about Patagonia opened their first store in Boston. And they found out that all their employees, the day they opened, got sick. So they thought it was asbestos in the building. So they hired environmental people to come in, and they're like, hey, what's going on with this? So they thought for sure it was the building. But then they started going in the basement and realized there was high levels of formaldehyde in the basement. And they're like, what is this? So they started opening up all their clothes, and they realized really quickly that their clothes, all the cotton was sprayed due to bugs with formaldehyde. And that's what they made their clothes, and it made all their employees sick. I'm going to wrap this back together with what I'm saying. So then you look at it. So Patagonia went and ended up buying all the organic cotton they can find and then depleted the market of organic cotton. So then they started saying, okay, how do we fix this problem? So they started doing this clothing buyback. So Patagonia figured out how to say, as a group and as a company, we can be responsible, but at the same time, they caused a problem by depleting all the stuff. But their community of people now, they were able to do the right thing, right? So you're going to have communities that say, hey, we are going to do the right thing. We're going to be responsible. But if let's say Rennie wants to start a group, or something, I know that if I go to Shelly and I use her as a real estate agent, or I do business with you, I know that you're not doing weird things that I don't agree with. You might not be spraying your chemicals with the food. So if I buy my fruit, let's say I buy vegetables from you, I know how your pride in how you take care of your food and what you spray them with, or how you're spraying your clothes. So I would prefer, as we have these smaller communities of people, I think you're going to see some of them do good things. I think it could get dangerous as well. I think it's going to get dangerous, but I think you're going to see some small communities do really well with it and say, okay, I know I can develop communities of people that are together and that can do things the right way. Another example would be, kind of bring this full circle, is data protection, right? How much data in our world is going out there, but I think communities are going to be able to protect that. So I think you're going to see in the future, what I believe you're going to see is all these small communities that were really small and tight niche. I think you're going to start to see them popping off, but there's going to be an influencer in that city that says, hey, I'm able to design this, but you have to trust the people that you're with, I suppose. Yeah. Am I making sense, or am I not? Am I bringing that full circle?
I think, I think it's a large concept to think of where it could go. And it's so foreign to what we're...
How do you control, though, what so as not we as people, but how as a world, how do you suppose we see that going other than that? The other answer is mass production.
Right. Which we see.
Right.
We see right now.
But we're seeing that there's problems with that.
There's huge problems with that.
Right. So how do you control that?
Well, it's to go the other way, to get out of the mass production. Like, okay, how does mass production happen? Like, somebody creates something and then everybody wants it, and we want to scale, so we're going to send it off to China and have them build it, but then what they build it with might not be the best.
No, it could be child slavery involved.
Exactly.
It could be all sorts of stuff involved in some of this.
And I think people are getting to the point where they're recognizing the evil that's behind that stuff, where
100%.
Before we just didn't think about it.
100%. I think that's exactly. I mean, I think you're going to look and say, I think you have to ask questions of how do we solve the problem if we continue the way we're doing? And what is the other answer? So if the issue is that we're running into a problem with mass production in China, the issues that they're running into with already, I don't think China is getting crushed at the moment. We've talked about that. I don't think they're going to continue to do that. So some of that stuff we have to solve that problem back in the United States. So how do we solve the problem of consumers, how do we become more responsible? And that gets out of control as you start to get bigger. But we can control that as individuals and communities by our own ideologies and what we believe in. So if I don't believe in spraying or GMOs, or I don't believe in chemicals on my food, and I know that Shelley doesn't either, but we know Farmer Dan down the road doesn't do that. I'm going to use Farmer Dan, and we're going to go back to, I believe, this really small, tight-knit community and saying, okay,
I'm just going to buy stuff from people who I know are doing things responsible. I'm not going to go to the big chain store and buy my vegetables that were shipped here from who knows where.
100%. You start watching documentaries now of some of these documentaries called like Rotten. They're talking about whole wars are started over like avocados or like, and you start to, or, sugar cane, for cocoa and all this stuff. And you start to realize like, wait a minute, I am part of the problem.
Right.
And it's because I buy and so consumer responsibility is going to be important. And saying, okay, how do I be a consumer that is responsible and I'm doing the right thing. And I'm okay with buying companies that I know are doing the right thing. I'm not okay with anymore turning a blind eye and saying, okay, I know those shoes over there were made by child slavery, but I'm choosing not to see it.
Even if I have to spend double,
it's okay.
Over here.
Because if I spend double with Shelly because I know that she makes these shoes or these clothing, I know I spend double. I know I'm going to get that back because she's going to also use me in my business, and we're a small community. You're starting to see it in some of these small communities. Right now, they're very tight knit, which I think is good.
Yeah.
I think we'll have a healthy I think we will always have the technology global side of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think that all of a sudden we're going to go back to the Stone Age. I'm not saying that.
Do you think technology could be a part of this as well? And the reason I say that is, look, so I want to buy something from like somebody small. I want to know who I'm buying it from. And there's nobody in my town that does it. But
Right.
I can go on an Etsy store.
100%.
You know?
That's where technology will come.
Yeah.
I'm actually seeing a crab or lobster company that all the way from, so they have these QR codes on all the cages when they collect the lobsters in the ocean. As soon as that lobster cage comes up, those people scan that code. So you know the exact spot your lobster came from. And then you actually know the guy because he had his name scanned in there. As soon as he scanned it, you know the fisherman that caught it. Then that comes over to the U.S. and you can see the port that it comes on. So you're seeing these scan marks. So all the way down to where it came to the menu where you get your lobster, you scan that QR code next to the lobster. You can see exactly where that lobster came from. You can see who had their hands on it and why they did what it is. So there's problems that we solve. And one of the ones is like the cocoa industry, the chocolate industry is extremely brutal on people today. But if I can see that there was a family that held a cocoa field over in a different country that maybe ran through some struggles, there's not enough profit in cocoa right now where that family can be blessed by it. But I can choose maybe by reading the bio that they put in there to tip them or do whatever. Maybe that is the answer in the future, and maybe there's something cool we can do with that. And the technology already exists, but could you imagine scanning, like, maybe it's not Snickers, maybe it is, but you're scanning in the back of a Snickers bar, and Snickers can't afford to upcost it because you know you're not going to pay $3 for a Snickers. You might be willing to pay 80 cents for a Snickers or $1, but I can turn around and give $1 tip to this kid that I know and his family because I read the bio. That'd be kind of neat, right? You'd be willing to do that because you have that personal interaction. So I think there will be some of that, but there's nothing better than knowing your neighbor and really blessing your neighbor and helping your neighbor out.
Right. It's crazy where it could go.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you need to do right now in this, and where are we going?
I think people just need to know what their role is, right? Like, what is it that you are doing in the world today, and who are you following, right? And you have to make these decisions of saying, are you a leader? Are you a follower? I think either way, you need to know and be aware of who are you?
Are you a leader? And if you know that you're a leader, what is your purpose as a leader? Why should people lead you? And if you know that you would rather be a follower and rather look up to somebody and follow after what
I think we all follow.
Well, I think we all do too. I think I'm a leader, but I think that there's sometimes that I follow as well.
Correct.
But as a follower, believing in who that leader is that you're aligning yourself with.
100%.
And so I know that is a huge topic, and we want to use that as our topic next time. So
yeah, absolutely.
We talked about some great stuff today, and the next time you see us, we're going to be talking about leaders and followers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So have a great day, everyone.